Picture this, a massive, shadowy geopolitical machine spanning multiple nations. We're talking about an empire built meticulously over 4 decades, designed to project absolute power and survive, well, pretty much any conventional threat you could throw at it. For years, this network shaped the very fate of West Asia. It looked completely untouchable. But then, in a blindingly fast sequence of events culminating in 2026, the whole thing just shattered. I mean, the dominoes fell with breathtaking speed, literally transforming the geopolitical map overnight. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into one of the most dramatic, cinematic, structural collapses in modern history.
Okay, let's dive into this. The sheer scale of this collapse is perfectly captured by a quote from Ahmed al-Sharaa in late 2024. He said, "The fall of Assad set the Iranian regional project back by 4 decades." Think about that for a second. 40 years of relentless, calculated geopolitical engineering effectively rewound to zero. This wasn't just some battlefield loss. No, this was the absolute unraveling of a meticulously crafted architecture of power. So that brings us to the central mystery we're unraveling today. How exactly does a massive coalition, one stretching all the way from the Mediterranean down to the Arabian Peninsula, how does it just vanish as an integrated force in a matter of months? Well, to truly grasp the sheer magnitude of this spectacular 2026 collapse, we actually need to hit rewind. We're going to flash back to the 1979 Islamic Revolution to see exactly how this machine was built from the ground up. Part 1, 1979 to 1982, the ideological genesis and forward defense. Right after the 1979 revolution, Iran's new clerical regime found itself staring down immediate existential threats. This was really highlighted by the brutal Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988. Confronted with chemical weapons and intense economic warfare, Tehran had a stark realization. Reaching conventional military parity with their Western-backed rivals, that was just not going to happen. They needed a totally new playbook. So, the crucial point is, they came up with their defining doctrine, forward defense. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of fighting at their own borders, they would push the friction outward. They decided to build asymmetric proxy forces deep inside other countries. Why? To keep their adversaries permanently occupied somewhere else. Now, what's really interesting here is the actual blueprint of this network, if we look at it node by node. It started with Hezbollah in Lebanon back in 1982, and then expanded outwards to Palestinian groups like Hamas, integrated Iraqi militias, and eventually the Houthis in Yemen. But look closely because there is a massive, fatal flaw baked into every single group. Each one had a key strategic vulnerability, like Hezbollah's complete dependence on a land bridge, or Hamas's geographical isolation. Keep this in mind, because this is serious foreshadowing. Every single one of these nodes had a fatal structural crack just waiting to be exploited. And anchoring that entire sprawling network was something called the Golden Ring. Ba'athist Syria was the indispensable sovereign transit corridor. We're talking about over 1,500 kilometers of unbroken supply lines. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the distance from New York City all the way down to Florida. And this route was moving weapons, capital, and IRGC personnel from Tehran straight to the Mediterranean. Syria wasn't just a friendly ally, it was the structural keystone holding the entire axis together. Part 2, 2011 to 2023, the operational zenith. Fast forward a bit to the 2010s. Under the command of Major General Qasem Soleimani, the axis reached a truly terrifying scale of expansion. When the Syrian regime was on the ropes in 2011, Iran orchestrated a massive transnational intervention that literally saved Assad. By 2014, they had successfully integrated pro-Tehran militias directly into the Iraqi state payroll through the PMF. And over in Yemen, they started providing advanced ballistic and drone tech to the Houthis. They took a local insurgency and essentially turned it into a regional powerhouse, capable of striking deep into rival territory. Then, following Soleimani's assassination in 2020, his successor, Esmail Qaani, took this massive footprint and formalized it into a brand new doctrine, unity of fronts. The concept was simple, but for adversaries, it was an absolute nightmare. The idea was that an attack on any single node would trigger a coordinated, overwhelming military response from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and the Palestinian territories, all at exactly the same time. At this point, the axis was at its absolute peak. Part 3, 2023 to 2024, the unraveling cascade. But then, the script violently flips. The ticking clock really starts in October 2023. Hamas launches its assault, heavily attempting to leverage that exact unity of fronts doctrine we just talked about. But instead of a unified, glorious victory, it triggers massive internal friction and unleashes a relentless, multi-phase state counteroffensive. The dominoes start falling fast. By mid-2024, the operational focus shifts north to Lebanon. By September, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, is assassinated. In October, direct Iranian missile and drone volleys are heavily intercepted. And then, the real kicker, December 2024. A rapid rebel offensive sweeps through Syria and actually captures Damascus.
Honestly, the sheer scale and speed of this systemic dismantling is just staggering. We saw high-intensity, multi-domain state campaigns aggressively degrading the network. Hamas was fractured and reduced to an insurgency, with Yahya Sinwar eliminated. Hezbollah's deeply secured internal communications completely compromised, and its top military leadership was wiped out. Meanwhile, Iran's own strategic deterrence, like their S-300 air defense batteries, radar systems, and missile production facilities, was systematically destroyed by targeted strikes.
But this right here, this was the absolute fatal blow. Remember that 1,574-kilometer golden ring we talked about earlier? The fall of Assad in December 2024 severed it completely. Just like that, the Levant land bridge was totally gone.
Part 4. The Terminal Shock, December 2024.
And this brilliantly illustrates the aftermath. When opposition forces led by Ahmed al-Shara took Damascus, they didn't just change governments. They literally pulled the plug on the entire Iranian network. The shift was catastrophic, and it happened overnight. Logistical supply lines severed at the Iraqi-Syrian border. Integrated state air bases and depots seized or destroyed. Forward intelligence and early warning systems completely eliminated, creating a massive blind spot on Israel's northern border. Transnational militias were suddenly forced to evacuate back to Iraq or disband entirely. Hezbollah found itself totally isolated, shifting in the blink of an eye from an offensive spearhead to a defensive unit just trying to survive without any heavy resupply. Which brings us to the number 12. In June 2025, the region witnessed what became known as the 12-Day War. This brief but intensely devastating multi-day conflict culminated in severe U.S. and Israeli strikes directed right at Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities and military command centers. Because they no longer had those forward proxies to act as a buffer, Tehran is left completely exposed and strategically isolated. Let's move on and see how this builds, because this total exposure paved the way for the ultimate leadership vacuum, what we can call a complete decapitation cascade. It actually started years earlier with Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. Then, late 2024 saw the sudden elimination of proxy leaders like Sinwar and Nasrallah. But the absolute climax hits in February 2026, when a joint military campaign directly targets Iranian command infrastructure, resulting in the death of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. By March 2026, a new Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, assumes power, but he's taking over a fractured state that is just grappling with intense economic pressure and massive domestic unrest.
Part 5. Systemic Vulnerabilities, an Analytical Autopsy.
So what does this all mean? How did a seemingly invincible alliance fracture so spectacularly? Well, the structural flaws were actually baked into the design from the very start. First off, there is the asymmetric deterrence paradox. Basically, non-state proxies are absolutely incredible in low-intensity, gray zone conflicts. But put them up against high-intensity, multi-domain state campaigns wielding advanced cyber, air defense, and precision intelligence, they collapse. They just lack the electronic and cyber resilience of a true nation-state. And second, there was that massive geographic single point of failure. The entire network relied on the sovereign survival of the Ba'athist state in Syria. Once that Syrian corridor fell, the operational continuity of the entire Levant network vanished in an instant. And this leads us to the ultimate strategic irony, the forward defense rebound. The entire point of that 1979 doctrine was to keep war far away from Iranian borders. But by pushing strike assets right up to the borders of their adversaries, they eventually invited the exact opposite. They invited direct, devastating decapitation strikes against the home state itself. The whole strategy essentially boomeranged right back to Tehran. Just compare these two realities for a second. During their zenith in the 2010s, this was a fearsome, integrated regional coalition projecting massive offensive power across the Levant, Iraq, and the Arabian Peninsula. But by 2026, it is completely fragmented. Hezbollah, the PMF, and the Houthis are now just a collection of geographically isolated entities. They're forced to prioritize their own local political preservation and domestic regime survival over any grand regional master plan. And Iran itself? Stripped of its forward buffers, the regime has retreated inward. They've adopted a decentralized mosaic defense focused purely on surviving at home. For the rest of the world, this signifies a fundamental, highly volatile shift in global energy security and Middle Eastern trade routes. The geopolitical map of West Asia has been violently and permanently redrawn. A 4-decade experiment in transnational proxy power has effectively come to an end. But, as we all know, power absolutely abhors a vacuum. With the axis of resistance fractured and Tehran forced to look inward, the board is wide open. So the question we have to leave you with today is this. In the wake of this spectacular collapse, what new powers will rise to fill the vacuum and take control of West Asia?